Alrighty, folks. Video number dos, religious interpreting. We're going to do 3. I had said 2 the other day, but actually I want to fit in 3 just because these are going to be shorter segments since I'm not actually physically in class. And that'll give us, we'll jump ahead a little bit so that we get more topics in. So, something that I do quite a bit, and I'm sure you guys already realize that, is religious interpreting. Specifically, I do Protestant Christian interpreting. There are a few other things that I do. I have done Catholic interpreting. Obviously, I've done Judaic interpreting this past week. But generally speaking, I do Protestant Christian interpreting. Along those lines, I think that it's important for you to know what you will and won't do. And I don't mean that, I've mentioned this when I went over the CPC, but I don't mean that in a discriminatory way. I mean that in a, where is there a conflict of interest, a perceived conflict of interest? Where do your skills just lack enough that it just really, you would be doing a disservice to that people group kind of thing, you know? For example, when I was in Israel recently, some of the Israeli sign language interpreters were asking me, well, isn't it against your faith to be interpreting some of this stuff with us? And I was like, no. Why would it be? And they're like, because you're a Christian. And I was very candid about that. And just so that there wasn't a, any conflict of interest. And I made sure before they even hired me that it was very, very apparent that that was the case. But they were really desperate and they needed an interpreter who knew about Judaism and about Israel. And so I was the one that fit the bill, despite not being a Jew. And so, but I was very candid so that there was no misconception that I was trying to evangelize to anybody or anything like that, just with who I was and what I was about. But anyway, so these Israeli sign language interpreters, they were asking me, isn't that against what you believe? And I was like, no. Everything I believe, or everything you believe, I believe. It's just that you don't believe everything I believe. I was like, so everything that's in your book is in my book. It's just that not everything that's in my book is in your book. So I could see it going the other way, but yeah, no, I believe everything you believe. So they were kind of surprised by that. But I was like, yeah, no, I have zero problems with interpreting anything. And I told them, however, if this had been like a Muslim trip, then yeah, I would have turned it down because there are some significant differences doctrinally and in different ways between what Muslims believe and Christians or Jews believe. And so, again, it's nothing against that people group. It's just, I really would be doing them a disservice in being there, and it would be even more of a perceived conflict of interest because I don't even know a lot of that stuff. And I know that it's counter to some of the things that I believe. And so, really, it is more than that. I think that a lot of people think, oh, well, you're just being discriminatory, and that's not the case. I'm using discretion and saying I would be a terrible interpreter for you. So anyway, I did learn a lot of new signs this past week, and hopefully we can bring in the rabbi that I worked with. I plan on trying to get him to come to Houston in November. And he's going to teach us some Jewish signs, which is really, really cool because I just don't think it's something that we get a lot. I think that living in the Bible Belt, we get a lot of Christian terminology, and we just don't get nearly as much of Islam or of Judaism. And so I'm super excited for him to be coming. Like, I learned the sign for rabbi, learned that. It's kind of cool. Anyway, yes, so be on the lookout for that. It should be a really fun workshop. He might even come to Signs of Joy and talk about the Holocaust from a deaf person's perspective, which would be really cool too. Anyway, goals. #goals. Yes. So yeah, I think it's really important to know where you stand. And if you don't have a firm understanding of your own beliefs, then again, you might be doing someone a disservice without even intending to do that. So know thyself. It's really important, right? One thing you can do to kind of study up on that is most churches or places of worship will have like a doctrinal statement, which just means what they teach, or a creed, what they believe. You can look at that ahead of time. A lot of times, like I said, on their website, or if you call them or talk to them, you can find out some of those details and very quickly find out if it's close enough to what you believe or if it's just too far away to be interpreting for that particular entity. I would say that's not even suggested. I would say that that's just a necessity. Like, you have to make sure of that before you go and do anything. So yeah, know what you believe, know what they believe, and make sure that they're enough in alignment that that you feel comfortable doing that. In addition to that, you need to know what some of the practices of that particular congregation are. Again, no matter what their faith is, like knowing how Muslims pray, a certain number of times a day. They and the Jews all face the east. Just knowing some of their traditions, some of their practices, knowing if they have specific holy days, like right now is Ramadan for the Muslims, or knowing when Shabbat is for Jews, or knowing when the Sabbath day is for a lot of Christians. Just some of those specific things, some of their specific holidays, some of the particular practices. Like I got to participate in bar and bat mitzvahs this past week, and that was kind of cool. So knowing, like, I didn't realize they throw candy at people. That was kind of cute. Right after they go through their not orientation, but after they go through their whole ceremony. So that was kind of cool. Just knowing some of the specifics of their ceremonies, of their holidays, of that kind of stuff. It's really important to know. Again, I had mentioned this even in the international interpreting, the dress code. It's really important to know what kind of dress code the particular place that you're going to has. Like, for example, at my church, I stand the whole time. So really, even if I wanted to have a skirt that kind of came up to my knees, I don't really wear skirts like that anyway, but if I wanted to, I could, because I'm standing the whole time and I'm not on a high platform where you could see up my skirt. But I went and interpreted for Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church with some of my friends here in Houston. It's a predominantly Black congregation, super nice ladies, and but they sit kind of like on the stage. And so if you're wearing a skirt of any length, they ask you to like cover up with a cloth or a blanket or something like that, just to be modest. And I didn't argue about that. I said, absolutely, and I followed whatever it was that they asked me to do. And so I think that's the main thing, is just respect, modesty, probably even more so than in your everyday interpreting. I mean, I think that in general, it's just professional to be modest. Whatever you want to do on your own time, for your own person, doing all that stuff is absolutely fine. It's absolutely up to you. I would say when you're representing an entire people group, it's important to try to just err on the side of caution. And especially even more so when you're interpreting for an entire people group in a religious setting. I think that that's in particular, like I said in my last video, when I went to Ukraine, the first time, I'd never worn skirts or dresses or anything like that, but I did so out of respect for the local culture we were working with. Not all Ukrainians do, but the specific group of people we were working with do. And so, so I did that, and come to find out they were super comfortable, and now I wear them. I didn't used to. So sometimes I realized my biases were too biased. Anyway, I would make sure that if you're going to be standing, that you, again, have some comfortable shoes, something that you're not going to pass out on. That would not be good. Make sure that if, I even need to do this more, and I need to make sure that my hair is pulled back, because I think I tend to brush it out of my face a whole lot. And trying to think of anything else clothing wise. A lot of places ask that you at least cover your shoulders, probably at least to here. I would say even not tank tops, but I can't think of what it's called, but basically like a sleeveless shirt. I've seen interpreters wear that at churches. I would just err on the side of caution and probably wear at least like a regular t-shirt, not t-shirt, but like that length of a shoulder or higher on your arm, or like a 3/4 on your arm. For guys, you don't always have to wear ties. It may be something that you kind of check. A lot of times I gauge what I'm going to wear by the local congregation. So I may try to check out pictures on their website, or, what have you. You always want to be somewhere in between what the pastor or minister on stage is wearing and what the congregation wears. If most of the people on stage are not wearing jeans, even if the congregants are wearing jeans, then I probably wouldn't. If that makes sense, because really I try to be on level with what the people who are on stage do. Like at my particular church, the music pastor always wears jeans, and the main pastor always wears a suit. So maybe somewhere in between there. I don't know. It probably would be cool if I wore jeans. I don't, but it probably would be okay as long as they were nice jeans and I wore a nice shirt with it. It'd probably be fine. Um, all right. So just know where you're working. I think I'd mentioned to you guys, but just to reiterate again, again going back to the beliefs thing, I there was that one church that I subbed at, and I had done all my homework. I had looked everything up. It seemed like it was cool. I was going to be fine. I got there and realized that they asked me, being a woman, to stand in the back and interpret for this man that I was there for, so that even though he was a man, because he had a female interpreter, we had to stand in the back. And he was on board with that, and the pastor was on board with that, and so I had to be on board with that. And it irked me to my core. But I just kind of had to get over myself and just do what I was there to do. And I did not accept that job again because I knew it was too much of a conflict of interest with my own personality. But as far as just being there that day, I just sucked it up, did what I was asked to do, and probably my vein is twitching right now. So anyway, yes. As far as religious settings go, there's also a variety of kinds of religious settings. Like, I'm mainly talking about stuff that you would see at a synagogue, a temple, a mosque, or a church. But really, there's a lot more than just that when it comes to religious interpreting. There are religious schools, like even K through 12 or pre-K. There are colleges that are religious. There are seminars and workshops. There are just any number of things that would fall still into religious interpreting. In fact, to the point where just going to a secular, a completely non-religious area, this is why in the fall we're going to work on religious interpreting, no matter what your faith background is, because it will come up at some point in time, especially because we do live in the Bible Belt. But even aside from that, even when I've been in other cities and states, it just comes up. They'll make references to things in the Bible. They'll make references to things from various faiths. And you need to have at least a base level of familiarity with some of that stuff. I have a base level of knowledge about Islam. I have probably more than a base level of knowledge of Judaism and of various forms of Christianity. And so that when that stuff comes up, I know what they're talking about. Whether I believe it or not, I know what they're talking about. And so it comes up in philosophy classes, it comes up in government classes, it comes up in English and literature, it comes up everywhere. It comes up at funerals, it comes up at weddings, it comes up. So, I mean, even if you're like, I'm not doing religious interpreting, totally fine, and I absolutely respect that. No matter what my faith background is, I hope you guys know me enough at this point to know that I respect any decisions that you make. But it's going to come up. It's just like, I don't watch football, but I have to at least have like some knowledge of football because it's going to come up, because we live in Texas and it's going to come up. That's an area identified. I really do need to learn more about that. So yeah, we will be doing some religious text. I'm not going to pick it for you. You will pick whatever you want to in the fall, but you're going to have to do something because it's going to come up at some point in time. But yeah, really, there are a variety of different areas. Even, what's his name? I'm not going to think of his name. David Ramsey does those financial webinars and workshops and things like that. And he has books out about how to budget and such. And it's really filtered over into the secular world. And so, that would be important to have some knowledge of. He might bring up his faith background if he were to be giving some of those webinars and workshops. All right, very good. So, volunteer versus pay. So, 99% of the time when you're doing religious interpreting, it's going to be volunteer. I can say that it's something that I've advocated for a lot. Peggy and I both have at our church, and thankfully our church has been really willing to listen and open-minded about trying to make sure that when we bring in other people, they get paid. Peggy and I, again, just to be very transparent, we volunteer our services as members of the church. And so anytime that there's something that we're interpreting, we're not charging for that. But when we bring in substitute interpreters, when we've, I don't know, like even bringing Sarah in to teach the ASL classes when we're bringing people in, not necessarily as a guest speaker at Signs of Joy sometimes, but not necessarily. But certainly to come in and interpret for us on a Sunday morning, or we even had somebody go to a women's retreat. They're getting paid for that because they're not a member of our church and they're providing a service. So they're getting paid like a contractor would. And we think that's fair. They even get, for the Sunday mornings, they get a little bit of extra so that they have prep work time as well. And we think that that's fair. A lot of churches won't necessarily do that. I know my friend Cindy Barnett, she's super fantastic. She really has, not just with religious entities, but just with entities in general. She kind of has her own checklist that she goes through, and you can ask her about it if you're ever interested. But that she goes through to make sure that they qualify for her to provide pro bono services. So, some of those things that she might look at are your employees getting paid, your staff? Do you have volunteers working for you? I don't know her entire checklist, but it's some of those kinds of elements that she's saying, well, if everybody here's volunteering their services, then it makes sense that I would be volunteering my services, essentially. And if it's not covered by law, which religious entities, unfortunately, are not covered by the ADA, they're not covered by Rehabilitation Act 504, or any of the main laws that we use to provide interpreters. Unless, and I've had to argue this with colleges before, unless it's a college that's receiving FAFSA. Because if you're receiving federal money, then you have to follow federal law. So Rehabilitation Act 504 would apply in that particular case, as well as probably the ADA. And a lot of people don't get that. They're like, well, we're religious. It doesn't matter. If you're accepting federal money, then you have to follow the federal law. It just makes sense, right? It's unfortunate that you have to argue in some of those cases, but... And my biggest pet peeve, getting on my soapbox really fast, and I know I've mentioned it before, but is religious entities not providing qualified interpreters for their events. And I don't care if you're Jewish, I don't care if you're Muslim, I don't care if you're Buddhist, I don't care if you're Wiccan, I don't care if you're Christian. If you purport to believe in a certain creed and you're not providing quality interpreters for that, what are you really telling the deaf people, I always tell the Christian entities that I work with, if you're not providing that, you're telling deaf people one of two things. You're either telling them that they're not important enough to hear your message, or your message isn't important enough to hear. Which one is it? And a lot of Christian entities don't like to hear that. But you're saying one of the two. Which one is it? So I do not pull any punches when it comes to that. I'm just like, either you don't care that they know about Jesus, or they're not important enough to hear about him. But, yeah, I don't know. Let's see. As far as getting paid too, probably a lot of times it would be a contract basis, meaning that you'd have to take out your own taxes and all of that. And we'll hopefully have a guest speaker that will talk some about working, as a contractor and how that exactly works with your taxes and that kind of stuff. But there's probably not enough religious interpreting to go around where you would be doing this 100% of the time anyway, unless you work for an organization like Deaf Missions or Campus Crusade for Christ, or I'm trying to think some other ones. Most of the time it's not going to be like 100% of the time that this is what you're doing. Prep work. Okay, so again, I can only mainly speak toward Protestant Christian interpreting, and really Catholic as well. But very often, most sermons, and I would imagine this is somewhat true for Judaism and maybe even Islam, I don't know for a fact, but it's a lot all at once. It's a scholarly talk. So they're going to go through, like, I can speak for my particular church. The pastor will get up and give a sermon. So he'll go through some biblical text. He'll go through what the original Greek, what the original Hebrew or Aramaic meant versus what it means today, how that applies. He'll talk about cultural and historical events that happened. So you're getting a whole bunch of different categories of information, linguistics and history and all of this that are being thrown at you. Plus then they'll throw in that football analogy that, again, I don't know much about. And so there's humor. And then also there's a whole set of music. So I'm doing an entire concert and a scholarly sermon, all at once, just in an hour and a half interpreting session. And it's a lot. Usually we'll have at least, I would say, 4 or 5 songs, maybe more sometimes. So I have to prepare all of that music. And then thankfully, I'm very, very thankful for our current pastor because he does get us a transcript of what he's going to say ahead of time. So you better believe I'm reading that. I'm reading the verses he's going over. I'm looking up words that I think I'm going to have trouble with as far as how they translate into sign language. I will pull him aside at the beginning of the sermon before it starts often, and I'll ask him questions about, okay, I read that you're going to be talking about this. What's your angle here? How would you define this concept? So that it helps me to define it in sign language. And he's very open to me pulling him aside and asking him some of those questions ahead of time. Sometimes if I have the opportunity, we have some deaf congregants who are very knowledgeable about the Bible, so I'll pull them aside if they get there early and say, what's your take on this? How would you sign this? And then at the end of every sermon, I go up to the deaf people and I say, did it make sense? Is there anything I can do better for next time? And thankfully, they've gotten used to giving me feedback, and they're really great about it. You know, they'll say, oh yeah, I would sign this way. Absolutely. You know, and I just move forward. So yeah, prep work is super important, and I would say that you'll get the spectrum on that. You know, you're going to get some places that they're like, well, we go by the Spirit, and I'm not putting down on that. Absolutely not putting down on that. But it does make my job a lot harder as an interpreter. I'm just less prepared, and so sometimes I'm not going to set it up as well as I could have set it up if I'd have known what we were going to be talking about ahead of time. What else? I don't know, prep work. Yeah, the more you can prepare, the better. If you're ever interested in coming, especially during your internship, I would highly recommend it. You can come to my church. They're open to, and not just my church, but any church where they have interpreters, certified interpreters. You're welcome to come. Like in my particular case, we'll give you a song ahead of time, and you can prep that and then interpret it, and then we'll give you feedback on that. Sometimes if you feel comfortable enough, maybe you could do like the announcements or other things like that. So just do a little bit of interpreting just to get your feet wet and see what religious interpreting's like. Let's see. I feel like there was something else I was going to say about that. I don't know. But yes, I've had people of all various backgrounds come and interpret with me on a Sunday morning just so that they could get their feet wet, and there's not going to be any judgment there. So just be aware. What else? Oh, often you're not going to have a team. Occasionally, Peggy and I are both there on a Sunday, and certainly we do team with each other if we're both there. But because sometimes there's been more than 2 of us, sometimes not. But especially when there's only 2 of us, I'm out of town or she's out of town, or maybe one of us is sick or whatever the case may be. And so sometimes it's just that one person. And so your prep work is really going to be important at that point in time. But often you are going to be by yourself. Some churches, they'll take one person does the music, one person does the message. I mentioned Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church earlier. They have a whole team of interpreters, and they actually interpret every single one of their sermons. Fantastic ladies. They really do an amazing job. I don't know how they do it. So anyway, and you can break it apart however you like. I mean, I have some friends who are like, I really feel comfortable doing music and not messages, and so that's what they do every week is they do music. Just know if you have a niche and try to work toward that. As far as teaming too, it helps if you have some of the sermon notes, or that you need to have read through everything that the active interpreter would have read through. And so when I know that I am going to be there on a Sunday where Peggy's there, I still read through and prep, because what if she gets sick at the last minute and then I'm already prepared to go. So it really does help to be as prepared as possible, either for yourself or for your team. And that's just true for daily interpreting, really. What else could I say about that teaming? I think it's important, especially in a religious context, that if the team can't see what's happening, the stage action, that you're able to feed them that. That's true in a classroom or other places too. But often, you know, pastors in particular, and probably in other faiths, they're big on using visual examples. And so the more you can feed that to the active interpreter, the more it helps them to build an all-around good picture of what's happening. What else? There's just, you know, within various faiths, not so much at my church, but I know in a lot of places there are rituals, again, like I said, or they will have like specific prayers that they're going to say. So again, in the fall, if you know that you go to a particular place of faith where they say Hail Mary, or they say the Our Father, or any kind of specific text, it may be something you go ahead and just gloss so that you have it ready. Because if it's going to be said ritualistically, then it's important to really know how you're going to sign it. And try to find it online and see if a deaf person's already glossed it. That's obviously always optimal, is to go with whatever the deaf gloss is. I think that's mostly it. If you guys have any questions about religious interpreting, get with me. We'll talk about it more in the fall when you guys are doing your actual religious interpreting segment. But yeah, it's a pretty fun gig. It's not usually a paid gig, but it does come up just about everywhere. And so at least having a base knowledge of this is going to help you tremendously in the long run. All right, that's it for this one.